Welcome back to the next episode of First and 10 Minutes First. I'm your host, Asher, and today I'm interviewing an ex-offensive lineman, Brandon Phillips. I've known Brandon Phillips because he was my offensive lineman coach in my first season of tackle football. I hope you enjoyed the episode. So, Brandon, tell me about how you started football.
Sure. So ever since I was a little kid, even before I ever played football, I just got it in my head that I loved it. And I think I was probably 8 or 10 years old. And I just said, I want to be a football player. This is before I had ever even played. Back then, they had Pop Warner, and there were age limits, right? And there were also weight limits.
Yeah.
And I was always a little too big to play within my age group. So it was always something I wanted to do. And I didn't even have a chance to do it until I was in middle school. But I knew from an early age, like, this is something I want to do.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Tell us about, after that, what did you do? Did you do middle school ball or high school ball or what's up?
So I started playing in 7th grade, and it was still Pop Warner. They didn't have middle school football, at least not out here back then. And so I played that. Honestly, had a couple rough first seasons. I did have to play in the bigger, heavier group, right? So I was playing with kids that were a year or two older than me, and just had never played before. So I was going as hard as I could, but I just had no concept of the game, of blocking and tackling, and I was always very tall. So I remember the very first time that we had full padded tackle practice. I was going against a kid. His name was Johan, and he was a kid from South Phoenix. Okay. And I was, a baby-faced 7th grader, and this guy had a goatee, and he had tattoos, and he had been playing since he probably could walk.
Yeah.
And he was like the Bo Jackson of this league. He could outrun people, he'd blow people over. My very first tackling drill, I get paired with him. And, we had these cones set up. He could go in an A, B, or C gap. It was just me and him. He picked one. Whatever happens, happens.
Yep.
And I remember I ran in there trying to get him, but I was so high and so tall. Yeah. He put his face mask like in my belly button, and he about ripped me in half. That was a tough first day. I'll never forget that. It was discouraging. Because I knew that, like I said, from the time I was a little kid, I want to play football. And then to go out and find out that, oh crap, this is really tough. There's some kids that are a lot better than you are at this. It was a kind of a gut check time, but luckily I had my dad who pulled me into the backyard. He started teaching me some of the just basics, fundamental, most importantly, to stay low.
That's good.
And it took me a couple seasons, man. But by the time I got to my freshman year, things were rolling. I started doing good by about 9th grade. And then I finished my high school career right up the street at Corona del Sol.
Yeah.
I had offers. I had done really well in high school. And so I could have went to a lot of places, just about anywhere I wanted to. But I decided I wanted to stay in state because my family is here. We're all from Arizona.
That's cool.
Yeah, so off to Arizona, and and then I would say from that moment on, it's that's all I wanted to do.
Yeah,
right? I just wanted to play football. I couldn't even see myself doing anything different. Right? For sure. Just loved it that much. Yeah.
So 7th grade, middle school ball. Approximately how big are you?
Oh gosh, I don't remember my exact height and weight, but in 7th and 8th grade, I wasn't necessarily towering over everybody, right? I was bigger than most. It wasn't until I probably hit my freshman year. So I can't remember how big I was, but I do remember in 8th grade, I had hit 6 foot. But then by the start of my freshman year, in high school, I was like 6'3.5" or close to 6'4", you know, and I was about 215 pounds.
Dang.
Yeah, as a freshman. So, that last year or so, I had really started to go. With
big guy.
Yeah. And then each year through high school, I gained, I don't know, about an inch or so. And then by the time I finished my senior year, I was like 6'7", maybe 6'7.5". And then, gosh, my senior year, I think going into that year, I was about 275 or 285.
Yeah.
And I played both sides of the ball. I played offense and defense. I actually love defense. That's really what I wanted to do.
Yeah, I love tackling dudes.
I loved it, man. I played defensive end, offensive tackle, and most of the special teams. So I never came off the field, which I loved.
Yeah.
You know, I just loved being out there, having an opportunity to make an impact every time the ball was being snapped, right? So yeah, then I would say going into my freshman year in college, being that I was going to play defensive end, I actually took some weight off. And so I came in, I think I was about 265 pounds. And that was, lean and, kind of defensive end, physique back then. So it was an interesting experience. One of the things you learn, like with your body, especially being like you, having, you're going to have a big frame, is with, just nutrition and workout and everything else. Like, you can kind of make your body into whatever you want. So I did kind of all the gamut, right? I went from like trying to be very lean, very fast defensive end to making the transition in college over to offensive tackle. And that's a very different body type, right? Sure. And that's kind of the one I still have today. Yeah. So that my weight even today still tends to fluctuate a lot based on whatever I'm doing.
Yeah.
How I'm eating, if I'm training, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, how was it like when was like that point in college when you like knew that you were gonna have a chance of making the NFL?
Sure. Well, like I said, when I went to college, it was just my plan. Like, I'd already made up my mind. Like, this is what I wanted to do. And so in my mind, I always believed it was going to be there for me. But I would say after I made the transition after my second year in school, and then I became a starter and things were going well, right? I was playing really well. Like, that's when you kind of start hearing. That's when you have coaches come up to you and tell you, or scouts or whatever. And they're like, you're going to play on Sundays. This is going to be, so that's obviously, it's very encouraging, but it's also, it's very focusing too, right? Like, once you start to see that, like, you get to that stage and your final goal is just around the corner, then you just double down.
For sure.
You double down. Yeah.
So transitioning into college to NFL, like, how did you do the combine? Did you get undrafted, drafted? What was going on there?
Yeah. Great question. And that's where my story gets a little long and complicated. So 2003 was going to be my final year at Arizona.
Yeah.
And heading into that season, I'd had, some success. So things were looking pretty good. I was still kind of all over like the draft board, but most had me going like on the first day. Back then the NFL draft, was in April. It was on Saturday and Sunday. They did the first half Saturday, second day Sunday, right? Yeah. So it was looking like I had a real chance to go, day one, right? Which is rounds 1 through 3. But a lot of that was still predicated on having a great senior season in 2003. Yeah. And so that year was a rough year for me because, I'll tell you that it was a rough year, but it was also a very, I would say, it was the year that God showed me how sovereign he was over everything in my life. So up to that point, I was not a follower of Jesus. So as a kid, it's funny because when I look back at my childhood and then even through college, I always had a yearning for God. Like, I wanted to know who he was. I remember as a kid just talking to him, right? Just like the way you would maybe talk to an imaginary friend, And, but I didn't really, study the Bible much. We went to church occasionally. I had heard about Jesus. Like, they would say I maybe even had some sort of belief in Jesus, but I didn't have a real relationship with Jesus, right? And it wasn't until the end of college where God was really starting, to pull on my heart. Yeah. And I remember before my senior year, so we're heading into 2003, I was at a Bible study with my girlfriend, who is now my wife. But we had just started dating that summer, and I was training in Phoenix, getting ready for my senior year down at the University of Arizona. And I ran into a guy who was an NFL player. His name was Andre Wadsworth. And he was a first-round draft pick from Florida State as a defensive end, playing for the Arizona Cardinals. He had some injuries, was rehabilitating at the facility that I was training at, getting ready for my senior year. So he had invited me out to a Bible study. Yeah. And I said, well, sure, I'll go. And I remember hearing the message of, the gospel being preached and feeling very tugged, like God wanted me to respond. Like God had something big that was coming for me just around the corner. And of course, I already knew this because I was literally at that point another, 8 months or whatever it was away from entering the draft. And, things were really looking a certain way for me. And so I said, okay, well, I want to try and, really follow Jesus. Like I want to know what his plan is for me and his purpose and what do I do with this? And so, I started going to Bible study, started trying to read the Bible a little bit. And I remember the season had started, I was playing great. I was playing the best football my whole life. Everything was lining up. And then it was about the third game or maybe the fourth game into the season. We were playing Oregon at home. Ooh. And they're a tough team even back then. And I was just playing awesome football. And I remember I went to chapel, which they would have chapel before the game on Saturday, right? When you're at the hotel. And we had a night game. So that afternoon, I listened to the chaplain give this message. And his message was about trusting God with everything, right? And how he was a football player, but he didn't become a Christian until after he got done playing. And I remember him saying one of his biggest regrets was that he never got to experience what it was like to say, Jesus, this is my football career. Like you can have it. Like in essence, to play not for himself, but to play for God's glory. Yeah. And that resonated with me. And I was just like, you know what? That's what I want to do. And I thought, that sounded great. I want to play for God's glory. I want to give my career to Jesus to use how he sees fit. Yeah. I want him to bless me, right? I mean, that's really what I wanted. I wanted to be blessed. Yeah. And so that night, before we go out in the game, before we're in the stadium, right before the kickoff, I remember I prayed a prayer and I just said, God, you know what? I'm going to give you my football career. Yeah. I said, I want you to take it. I trust you with it. And, it's yours. And so I stepped out on the field. Oregon was playing the best game. I think it was the best, some of the best football I had played in my life. And then it was very early in the game, the third or fourth series, I felt my knee just give out. Yeah. And I went down and I was sitting up with my legs straight ahead and I went to straighten my knee. Yeah. When I went to straighten my knee, nothing happened. And I was like, this, it's not working. Mm-hmm. Something very bad just happened. So the trainers come on the field, they get me off, and I go back, I get the MRIs, X-rays, be evaluated. Yeah. Both of the U of A orthopedic physicians were there that night, and they said, we've got some very bad news. You've ruptured your patella tendon, like completely ruptured it off the bone. When I got to the sidelines and rolled up my pants, I could see my kneecap was no longer attached. It was 3.5 inches into my quad. Oof. My knee didn't look like a knee. And they told me that night that they'd be willing to do the operation on me, and their goal would be to get me to full range of motion so that I could walk normal and play with my kids someday, but that I would never play football again. Dang. Yeah. So that left me with a whole bunch of emotions, right? Yeah. As you can imagine. I had only seen myself as a football player. Mm. Football was everything to me. And I literally just hours before said, Jesus, I want you to, I trust you with my football career. Yeah. And now I was told I was done and I was never going to play again.
That's crazy.
Eesh, well, that was a cliffhanger. You're going to have to tune in next week to see what happens to Brandon. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I have some very amazing news that now I'm a brand ambassador of Underdog Athletics. You can use my promo code ASHER15 to get 15% off your next order. And the link will be in the description below. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you next week. I'm Asher. Stay low, hit hard, and God bless.